was a guide for how to create your own apps for democracy. If you're not familiar with what that is, it's basically a contest to encourage technology developers to build new applications for their neighbors or their city government using open government data. And we've been doing that in Washington, D.C., I think for about a little bit more than a year now. There were some really awesome questions that were asked and answered regarding the utility of these applications. Should people say, we want apps that do this specifically or that specifically? I think my phrase is, rules are the enemy of creativity and innovation. So any extra rule you put on something, you immediately cut that participation down by half, and then you're going to keep cutting and cutting and cutting. So leave it open and let people, our talented citizens, be creative and innovative.
What we talked about is the 9 principles of open government data. We've been at Sunlight working with these principles at the federal level, and trying to explain them to folks working at the municipal level is really important, so that knowledge can take hold there, so that people understand not just what data they should release, but how they should release it, and what makes a data set actually open.
We did a session on Open Government Data Initiative, the open source data publishing solution. A lot of interest. I think there were some folks, a lot of people certainly have not yet heard of the solution, so we did try to do an overview of the technology. We talked about some of the issues centered around publishing, and we were fortunate enough to have Devin from the city of Edmonton talk about their experiences and some of the things that they actually found really helpful about the technology. I actually learned a few things myself with regard to what they found valuable, which is terrific. One of the nice things that they found is that it helped them not to store, for example, multiple copies of the data in different formats. So Augie automatically serializes, and it's modular. You can write your own serializer to respond to additional requests. So, you know, I've heard a lot of folks having issues around publishing data. I'm glad that we actually have a capability that is open source that allows people to solve that problem. So we just talked about some of the issues about publishing data, how Augie can help solve that kind of thing.
Our session was the local government working group, and we were just mostly a collection of local government people and a few people from the outside of local government who were interested in what our issues were. We didn't really solve that much, but we asked a lot of questions. And it was pretty clear that everybody has, inside local government, everyone has a lot of questions that we want to figure out the answers to. We need things like a good elevator pitch for how do we sell this to people. We need to understand better who is going to use this data and how is it going to be relevant to citizens. That was, we talked about the digital divide and access to everyone. Why are we doing this? What kind of information do people want?
So, our session was, I think it was called Open Source and Open Standards Through Trial by Fire, how the Haiti earthquake and disaster, what the Haiti earthquake and disaster response can teach us about open cities. So I was sort of reflecting on some of my experience at Crisis Camp, which happened last weekend, as well as currently happening this weekend, and is also happening next weekend. And some of the tools that were focused on information management and logistics in the response to Haiti. Some of those big tools are Ushahidi, Sahana, the Person Finder, and a number of little apps that came up through Crisis Camp. And sort of the history of those applications and some of the standards that have come up through that, through 9/11, the tsunami, Katrina, the 2008 Kenya elections, the 2009 war in Gaza, and this current crisis in Haiti. All of those are sort of building this stack of information management for crisis and open source platforms and standards for that. And we're sort of reflecting on that and seeing what that can teach us about how we deal with issues in crisis, and also just deal with issues on the day-to-day basis. And actually what we ended up talking about was maybe having something like volunteer firefighters for information management, or instead of just having Boy Scouts and fire drills, you actually teach people about complex information management and how to deal with all the necessary skills that come with dealing with managing information in a complicated situation.
Our session, I titled it "Why Local Governments Don't Want to Share Data," and started by going through some of the reasons we've learned from the National Neighborhood Indicators Partnership around we're making money off the data, or I don't have time to put it together, or I'm afraid of bad publicity. And during our conversation, other people brought up the need to really push a value-driven approach, that the government is, that the data is public and should stay public. We also talked about the increased, how to work against fee-based motivations of people selling data. And then talked, I think, some practical steps about how to take small steps in both culture shift, real tools, data sharing protocols, use cases, how to make the case to share data, and did some brainstorming around rewards or carrots, highlighting innovative public agency officials, rankings to highlight good practices from cities. But I think what really came out was the need for space for local governments who are trying to do this work, to share lessons and challenges.
I work for a nonprofit here in Chicago named Tutor Mentor Connection. We are a sort of a one-stop hub for information, strategies, and tools pertaining to mentor to career programs in an attempt to help kids make decisions and equip kids with the tools to go to college and beyond into a career, in an attempt to address poverty, which is arguably one of the most important underlying factors of many of the community problems that we see addressed in the media and discussed here today. For my thing, I make maps. That's the tool that I am responsible for as part of visualizing the support, potential support for mentor programs in Chicago, and just a directory of the different programs that exist and are working with kids. So my 45 minutes was dedicated to introducing technology, and we spent some time sharing some information about building awareness and helping kids use maps to advocate for themselves.
The session we were in was looking at how we get more business leaders in the business community at large to be part of this kind of open data movement with us and be advocates for more open data through raising awareness of how open data can be useful for them to build new businesses, but then also just getting them to demand it along with us. So we talked a lot about how open data can work as a platform in much the way that Tim O'Reilly speaks of it, or as a wholesaler, and how we can build retail businesses on top of that. So looking at a lot of the different groups out there that may be useful to work with us, such as a small business association from inside government, how do we incentivize that or continue to incentivize it through things like Apps for Democracy, which Peter over there ran, or Apps for America, which happened last year, and continue to do those types of things, but also looking at some of the large opportunities that maybe corporations could also come in big, more factory-like ways in some measure. But one of the more interesting things that may be worth noting is incentivizing the creation of new businesses like the Old West, where government actually may have a tax-free zone for new businesses created off open data.